of 400,000 people directly with either a severe gambling problem, a severe gambling addiction, or well on the way to developing one, and each problem gambler affects the lives of 7 others on average, according to the Productivity Commission. We're here to say that we will be planning a whole series of measures, both in the Parliament and outside the Parliament, to deal with the issue of gambling reform, and in particular one issue that has resonated throughout the community, and that is on the issue of sports betting advertising. So many parents have approached all of us to say that they are appalled that their kids are talking about, their 7 and 8 and 10-year-old children are talking about the odds of a game rather than the game itself. There is a specific exemption that applies to gambling ads during sports broadcasts, which is an anomaly, and that needs to be shut down. That loophole needs to be shut down in accordance with overwhelming community sentiment in relation to this. And of course, Andrew will talk about the other things that we'll be seeking to do in terms of reviving a parliamentary committee to look at gambling reform, to push for reform in relation to online gambling and poker machines, which still take over $12 billion of Australians' money in terms of actual losses, and we know that 40% of that comes from problem gamblers. This issue won't go away, and it won't go away despite the power and the might of the gambling lobby in this country, because there are literally many hundreds of thousands of Australians who are suffering directly today because of gambling addiction, either themselves or their loved ones, and that's why this issue must be fought and that the fight must be won. We'll hear from Andrew Wilkie.
During question time, towards the end of the previous Parliament, I asked a question of Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. I asked him if he would entertain the idea of reform, and regrettably the Prime Minister said that, look, gambling reform, and in particular poker machine gambling reform, is a matter for the states and territories. Of course, that's correct to some degree historically. Historically, at least as far as poker machines have gone, the state and territories have regulated that gambling area. But of course, they've been shown to be untrustworthy. Just in my home state of Tasmania, it's telling that the gambling regulator sits within Treasury, which just goes to show that in the states and territories, they regard this as a revenue issue and not as a social or human issue. So there is a compelling case for federal intervention. And of course, the federal government does have clear authority when it comes to television advertising and online gambling. I mean, that is the domain of the federal government. Plus, we have a precedent. In the 43rd Parliament, the federal government did intervene in a poker machine gambling reform, and it was terribly regrettable that in the 44th Parliament, the Abbott government, with the support of the Labor Party in the Senate, overturned those modest reforms. So, you know, it's a bit of a sorry tale, and surely it is way beyond time in this Parliament, with a Prime Minister who has said years ago now that he was in favour of reform. Surely the time has come for parliamentarians to stand up, to represent the community and to finally take strong action. The sorts of measures that my colleague, Senator Xenophon, are entirely warranted. For example, to re-establish the Joint Select Committee on Gambling Reform, to ban gambling advertising during those periods of the day when children are watching TV, and in particular during sports broadcasts, to implement the recommendations of the Productivity Commission for, among other things, $1 maximum bets. The case is compelling, and it is very, very sad that up until now, parliamentarians have not seemed to care enough about the hurt caused by problem gambling, that parliamentarians have been happy to be completely out of step with the vast majority of the members of the community who want strong reform. Now, I'm sure at this press conference we'll hear lots of numbers, as we need to, but can I conclude by putting a human face to this? It's not simply about big numbers of people and big numbers of machines, big numbers about money that changes hand and money that is lost. This, first and foremost, is a human story. Every one of those problem gamblers that we're trying to help, that government should help, have an obligation to help, every one of them is a mum or a dad, or a brother or a sister, or a son or a daughter, or a friend or a work colleague. Every one of them is a human being. And it beggars belief that in 2016 we are still having to work so hard to bring a government, any government, to the table to finally do something to help these unfortunate souls. Because this is one of those issues this country faces, that we have it within our capacity to solve. It can be solved to a large degree by this parliament. And with a Prime Minister who has previously been on the records as being in favour of gambling reform, surely the time has come now.
Thank you. I speak for the Alliance for Gambling Reform. It was formed after the defeat of Andrew Wilkie and Prime Minister Gillard's pokies reform, when we realised that the pokies lobby, clubs, New South Wales with the hotels had so much money and could mobilise so many people to stop reform of predatory machines. And there wasn't a civil society group that actually represented the vast majority. 80% of Australians wanted pokies reforms, and they collapsed because there wasn't an equal voice for the public who wanted the reforms. The Australian Gaming Alliance is very committed this time to seeing reform on two things. The first thing is sports bet advertising. The only adult product that can be in G time, family time, is sports betting. And it's an exemption that no other adult products get. Parents stop me in the streets with genuine despair that their kids know the odds better than they know players' numbers and scores. Kids are being groomed to become gamblers because the AFL has handed over the sport we love to Crown Bet and to Packer, and this outrages parents. So to actually ban sports betting will have 95% of the community cheering. We're asking the major parties to do this. Secondly, when it comes to pokies that still do the greatest damage in the community by far, pokies are the ice cocaine of gambling. When we saw the reforms that Andrew and Prime Minister Gillard had agreed on collapse, we actually recognised we needed to do something. Today I want to honour the late and great Neil Lawrence. It's the anniversary today of his untimely death a year ago. Neil Lawrence, famous for Kevin 07 and the mining tax reform, produced a documentary film, Ka-Ching. And in that film, shown on the ABC, he produced new research showing the pokies are more predatory than we even thought, than I even, after 20 years of campaigning against them, understood. That the near misses in a pokey machine, where you are just one above or below the line on the fifth pharaoh to get the jackpot, is a con. It's rigged, and it's a highly addictive con. The dopamine released by that near miss in the brain hits the pleasure centre with the force of cocaine or ice. He showed in Ka-Ching that losses disguised as wins. You're down playing 5 lines, you have a win on 1 line, you're still down overall, but off goes the music, the lights, the jackpot sounds, is profoundly addictive. You've actually lost as soon as you press the button, but this con in the machine releases the dopamine. So this is why the Alliance for Gambling Reform with Maurice Blackburn are launching a case about product liability, about predatory machines that are highly addictive. And this is one thing that the Alliance is supporting and hopeful to see change in by showing how dangerous and predatory these machines are. Finally, Andrew referred to Malcolm Turnbull. At the time when we were debating would we go with $1 bets, maximum 120-hour losses, or a pre-commitment card, that is lock in your losses, Malcolm Turnbull invited me to his office. He had done an electorate scan in Wentworth, and overwhelmingly his community supported $1 bets, maximum $120 losses, that the Productivity Commission recommended. Malcolm told me about how he personally supports $1 bets, how his electorate supports $1 bets. We made a little video about it. That was the old Malcolm. A lot of the nation wants the old Malcolm back. The old Malcolm was very clear in supporting $1 bets. I'm appealing to that Malcolm now as Prime Minister, and congratulations for forming government, to actually take a stand against the pokies lobby, knowing with the Alliance there is now support. support on banning these sports betting ads that are taking over our kids' minds, and moving toward pokies reform with $1 bet, maximum $120 losses. Thank you.
Happy to take your questions. Well, so the question is, how big a bargaining chip is this? I mean, I said in my first speech in the Senate that the trouble with horse trading is that sometimes you end up with a donkey, or worse still, make an ass of yourself. This ought to be done not because it's a bargaining chip, because it's unambiguously the right thing to do. That there are so many people who are suffering from this, that there are so many lives destroyed, so many people that have been bankrupted, so many families that are broken up, and most tragically of all, people actually take their own lives, self-harm. So we will keep pushing this. Ultimately, if we don't get reform in this parliament, then this becomes a political issue in marginal seats, because go to a public meeting, the meetings that I went to in the course of the election campaign and well below that, before that, if you ask a crowd of 50, 100, 200 people, how many of you are directly aware of someone who's been damaged by gambling, damaged by poker machines, you get a significant show of hands. So we'll keep pushing it, but I think the government knows that if you're serious about alleviating income inequality, of dealing with poverty and all those sorts of issues, you need to tackle gambling reform.
On advertising, the networks or even the sports say they've got a code of practice that they're adhered to and that they're bound by. Have they wasted that right to say that they're doing right?
Well, the short answer is, have the networks wasted that right? Unambiguously, yes, and perhaps Andrew and Tim may want to speak about that.
Well, the short answer is yes. In the 43rd Parliament, the industry committed to self-regulation. Self-delusion. Unfortunately, though, the gambling industry has shown that it can't be trusted. The state and territory governments have been shown that they can't be trusted. This is a national challenge warranting a national response. Given the scale of the problem, given the fact that so many of the stakeholders can't be trusted, surely there is a compelling case for federal government intervention where there's currently no federal government action, and greater federal government action where there is legislation already in place. They can't be trusted. And, you know, it is self-evident. And I talk not only as a legislator, as a lawmaker, I also talk as the father of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old child. I don't want them to watch the footy on a Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon. I don't want them to, because they will be bombarded with advertising. I don't want them to play on my phone for fear of, you know, they go to these apparently harmless sites and there's an ad for gambling. It's wrong. The community knows it's wrong. But yet the Liberal Party and the Labor Party have refused to act. They are completely and utterly out of step with the expectations of the community and the demands of the people that vote for them. We've only had inaction up until now because the Liberal Party and the Labor Party are basically in lockstep, in part because they are deeply conflicted by the money they receive from the gambling industry. Heavens, the Labor Party even owns gambling venues in the ACT. Well, it's about time they put aside their financial and political self-interest and started focusing on the public interest. There is no doubt. There is a broad range, a very diverse range of members of the federal parliament who would dearly love to take strong action. If we could have a secret ballot, I reckon we'd have an amazing result. I'm not advocating a secret ballot. People should be able to walk into that chamber and show what they're made of. And the fact that they will just do what the party tells them. The party that is bankrolled by the gambling industry, is the shame of all of those people who refuse to take strong action.
So, Tim, do you want to add to that?
I just say on the networks, they absolutely have blown self-regulation. It's as sensible for them to regulate themselves on gambling as to say the tobacco industry will regulate itself in telling the truth. Self-regulation really is as nonsensical as saying seatbelts should be voluntary. Brakes in cars should be voluntary. What we've got is an industry taking so much money, the television industry, from this, that they are Dracula in charge of the blood bank.
Well, that's still evolving. The count is still on. If you think we're still waiting for House of Rep seats, we're still waiting, and there's still an outside chance that given how we polled in how my team polled in Queensland and in Western Australia, there's an outside chance of, depending on how people vote under this brand new Senate voting system, which I supported, that there may well be a chance to get a fourth senator. I mean, look, can I just say that the discussion I've had with Richard Denali from the Greens, the third largest party in the Parliament, I guess, after the third largest bloc in the Senate, is that we've worked closely together. Whatever differences we may have on other issues, Richard Denali and his team have been consistent, they've been principled in relation to tackling gambling reform. So I expect we'll continue to work well and collaboratively together. In terms of the numbers, let's wait and see what the numbers will be. I'm not sure what the views of Ms Hanson would be in her party, but the facts speak for themselves, and that's why it's important.
Okay, we just got to leave that there. That was live from Melbourne.